Hello, you're listening to The Sower, a podcast of the Ciceronian Society. The Ciceronian Society exists to equip and encourage Christian scholars to serve the Church as a center of cultural and civic renewal. Through our events, publications, and podcasts, we provide the space and opportunities needed by academic leaders among Protestant, Catholic, and Orthodox communities for professional growth and intellectual discipleship. Since 2012, we have been building a network of friends with a love for our core themes, tradition, place, and things divine, and with a genuine commitment to the Church and the life of the mind. To learn more about us, our events, this podcast, our journal, Pietas, to sign up for our newsletter and make your tax-deductible gift, please go to Ciceroniansociety.org. I'm Josh Bowman, Executive Director of the Ciceronian Society. Before we get started, please join me in prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, we pray, O Lord, that you would bless our conversation and that all we say and do would bring glory and honor to you. Amen. This is a special episode of The Sower because we're sharing a recording of the concluding roundtable from our March 2025 annual conference, which was held in Harrisonburg, Virginia. For those who haven't attended one of our events before, this may give you a sense of what our panels and roundtables are like. This particular roundtable is called Building Places of Intellectual Community, and the speakers are Paul Mueller from the American Institute for Economic Research, Jeff Nelson of the Russell Kirk Center, and Zach Howard of Bethlehem College. We typically don't record most presentations, and we admittedly do not have the best equipment, but I think if you turn up the volume, you should be able to hear most of what the speakers say, probably not all of it, but most of it. After audience Q&A, after the panel, there are also remarks by yours truly, and by the Ciceronian Society Board Chairman Bill Batchelder, and by Society President James Patterson, and we honor the winners of the Batchelder Award for the study of place and the Peter Lawler Memorial Award for the study of things divine. So that gives you some additional flavor of who we are as an organization and what the conference is like. I encourage you also to listen through to the end for some laughs and even a song. Hopefully you're able to hear a community of Christian scholars that you want to be a part of, and if so, please consider attending our 2026 annual conference at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska, March 12th through the 14th. Head over to Ciceroniansociety.org for more details. Enjoy.
All right, good afternoon, folks. We're going to start our final panel here, all right, sort of riffing off the biblical thing. Blessed are those who endure to the end. So you all have endured here, so congratulations. For those of you who haven't met, my name is Paul Mueller. I studied at Hillsdale and then did my master's PhD work at George Mason University. Taught at a place called the King's College in Manhattan for a number of years. And now I'm a researcher at the American Institute for Economic Research. But I'm very interested in our topic today, and I'm thankful to Josh for giving us this spot on the plenary, and thank you to my fellow panelists here. So we're going to give remarks. It'll be a little bit shorter and maybe a little less heavy than many of the panels, the great panels that we've had here so far, which is fitting as we wrap things up. And we'll wrap up a little bit earlier in terms of our formal remarks, and then we're going to bring some chairs forward. I'm actually going to ask my panelists some questions based on their comments, and then we'll open it up, of course, to the floor to have some conversation, because our panel is really about what Ciceronian is trying to do and what many of us are trying to do in our various contexts, which is form intellectual communities. So let me introduce my fellow panelists briefly. I'm going to give some brief remarks sort of about the panel. I'm going to have them come give their remarks, and I'm going to give a few more remarks at the end, and then we'll have kind of a conversation here. So that's our plan. I suppose it's fitting as well that I say a prayer before we dive in here, so let's go ahead and do that. Father God, we are grateful, Lord, grateful for this day, for the sunshine. Thank you for the opportunity and the freedom to gather. Thank you for the earnestness and the curiosity, Lord, the kindness and the conversations that we've had. We thank you for fellowship. We thank you for how this reflects in a small way, Lord, the fellowship you have in yourself. Father, I pray that as we wrap up this conference, as we have this conversation now, that you would help us to reflect on the things that we've learned and thought about, the friendships we've made, as we consider how we can go out from here, Lord, and put these into practice for the sake of your kingdom and for the edification of all peoples. Praise in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. All right. So in the order they'll be speaking, on my right is Dr. Jeff Nelson. I've known Jeff quite a while now. He's a good friend, and it goes way back to even like my grad school days and maybe even a little bit before that. And he's done quite a few things, spent a lot of his career at the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, where he launched the ISI Books Division. He was executive vice president there for a long time. He's currently serves as the executive director of the Russell Kirk Center for Cultural Renewal, which we'll be talking about. He has degrees, went to University of Detroit for his BA, Yale University Divinity School for his MA, and University of Edinburgh for his PhD. So he will be speaking after me. Then on my left, Dr. Zach Howard, newly minted Dr. Howard, just recently. I've also known Zach a long time, going back to our college days, and we have kept in touch and interacted in many ways over the years. And he is sort of a fellow traveler in so many ways as I've thought about intellectual community and as we've gone and done our different projects. So he is currently serves as the academic dean and assistant professor of theology and humanities at Bethlehem College and Seminary. He did his undergraduate at Hillsdale, as I mentioned. He has an MDiv from Bethlehem College and Seminary. He has a master's from the University of St. Thomas, and he recently completed his PhD in theology from Durham University. And I always love to plug it because I love the topic, and so you can ask him about it later. But his dissertation was on Augustine's use of imagination in his sermons. So if you want to talk about imagination and theology, he is a good person to talk to. So these are my panelists. I've introduced myself. I'm going to give, again, just some brief remarks about intellectual community, some of my reflections on it. And I've asked both of these gentlemen to speak because they have been doing it in various capacities for a long time, and they think about it. They're involved in these kinds of projects. So I'm thankful for them to be here. So here are my remarks. So intellectual community has deep connections to the liberal arts and to friendship. One can, of course, have friendships that don't revolve around the liberal arts, and one can be interested in the liberal arts without having close friends. But the kind of intellectual community I'm interested in, and the kind I think is worth pursuing, involves this overlay of friendship and liberal arts. But it includes other ingredients as well, ingredients of family and place. And the reason these latter two ingredients matter is because we are not disembodied spirits. We live in a physical world and can only be in one physical place. Furthermore, we are creatures embedded within families. We must come from them, and generally we ought to produce them. Nearly the entire substance of our childhood and varying degrees of our adulthood exists within one family context or another. And this familial element differentiates the intellectual community I'm interested in from the modern secular university that tends to be very abstracted from traditional forms of family. Now, Christian communities, especially churches, can extend this familial element to spiritual brothers, sisters, fathers, and mothers. And, we'll have some conversation about this, but I think churches have a responsibility for cultivating, encouraging the life of the mind in its members. Just as it also has the responsibility to cultivate good habits of living, holiness, stewardship, and virtue. Study is also an integral part of the intellectual community. And if people are unwilling to study, then there's limits to how vibrant and deep the intellectual community can be. What we might run into instead, one of the dangers we ought to look out for is instead of an intellectual community, we have a pseudo-intellectual community with lots of talking and lots of heat, but perhaps not much light. And so I'd argue that vibrant intellectual communities produce things, not just ideas, but tangible outputs, papers, essays, podcasts, videos, conferences, colloquia, music, and art even. And even though these intellectual communities ought to produce something, that's something we should consider, we also have to balance that production with reflection. And this can be challenging, right? And the trade-off between spending time reflecting and thinking versus spending time producing will vary by person and by season. Now, intellectual communities are also not primarily about the free association of independent radicals, so to speak, but there's something more organic, right? Of course, a good intellectual community must be free freely chosen, freely participated in. But it should also be more than simply an organization of unconnected adults who want to learn something. And so in this respect, I would put forward that we should again return to, or consider at least, the church as perhaps a better model than the university for fostering some of these kinds of intellectual community. For in the church, the whole person is engaged, and also usually family is engaged as well, the whole family. And so children should have a place to some extent in the intellectual community well, as do those husbands or wives who maybe are less bookish than their spouses, right? What is an intellectual community that is open to all who want to be a part of it in some way, shape, or form? Now, I use the word intellectual to modify the term community in order to express or describe its character. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, one can have non-intellectual communities. In fact, I think that's how most communities should be described. And while there can be drawbacks to an intellectual community, I would strongly prefer to have that kind of community informed and interested in ideas and learning. In such a community, books and conversation and ideas are prized. This sort of community is not opposed to the practical trades or practical work. You think about the plenary at the end of the day yesterday. But I do think it avoids centering on such things, right? It also must resist the temptation of what you might call entertainment doping, right? Whether sports or cinema or gaming, right? These often, I think, detract from it. But another question we should ask is, why pursue the intellectual community? Again, I may have a friendly audience here, I assume, but what makes it valuable, right? What do people in this intellectual community do? I think in a nutshell, people in intellectual community sharpen and encourage one another to deepen their understanding and appreciation of God and what He has made. And again, though an intellectual community need not necessarily be Christian, I think we ought to argue the best and most complete ones are. And so an intellectual community that builds around the liberal arts and understanding God and creation, I would argue, cannot help but have ameliorating effects on the human condition. It brings greater clarity to right and wrong actions. It refines our view of flourishing and how to lead an excellent and happy life. Done rightly, such communities should foster creativity, meaning, and excellence. And people in such communities should be growing in beauty and wisdom as well as in friendship. And these benefits, say, of a Christian are not only for the Christian members of an intellectual community, but I would also argue their benefits should extend to the broader secular community within which they are embedded. As intellectual communities produce beautiful art, stirring music, and intriguing ideas, they can bless the broader community. And they also extend a kind of implicit invitation for others to come and partake. Now, I'm sure most of you have read The Four Loves by C.S. Lewis. And his chapter on friendship, I think, relates closely to what an intellectual community ought to be and gives us a sense or some ideas for how we can cultivate them. Now, Lewis, as you probably know, argues that true friendship, as opposed to mere companionship, must grow out of a shared appreciation and interest for some object or activity. Friendship draws our shared attention towards objects or ideas that we care about. And in pursuing that shared object, we find this fellowship, excitement, encouragement, even the kind of solidarity that so many people seek. Friends believe they share an interest in something that is valuable or even beautiful. But Lewis also notes, rightly I think, that friendship is the least necessary of the loves. You'll find it hard to make it through life without receiving or experiencing affection and charity. And the naturalness of Eros, or its companion Aphrodite, have been written about and portrayed ad nauseum. But friendship, well, people can go through life experiencing companionship, but without close friends. But most people also go through life never being part of a vibrant intellectual community either. So a final comment I'll make here in some of these initial remarks is that intellectual communities have concentric and sometimes overlapping circles of participants and topics. Right? All of us here are part of some larger or smaller, weaker or stronger intellectual communities, right? In our schools, our universities, our churches. And the Ciceronian society here is a kind of intellectual community, right? One that perhaps moves around a little bit in terms of not having a single place, although I do see families, so I can't say it's not grounded in families as well, so that's an encouraging piece. But our university, our college, our school, those may be intellectual communities, our church, and we may be part of other associations of academic or intellectual interests, and that's part of my interest here as well. In my briefer later remarks, I'm going to highlight some alternate approaches to intellectual communities. Two inspirations for what I'm trying to do in Leadville, where I live, inspirations of Macosta and Labrie, of Russell Kirk and Francis Schaeffer, as unusual or different kinds of models of engaging an intellectual community. I'll also tell you a little bit about an intellectual community I've learned more about recently, which is that of my employer, the American Institute for Economic Research, which has its own kind of interesting history and element here. So as I wrap up, and I'm going to invite Jeff up here in a second, all of this is fine or even good, but the questions I want to leave you with, and that my fellow panelists will address, I'll come back and talk about briefly, is this. Do you have or do you participate in healthy and dynamic intellectual communities, right? Does that community have the elements of liberal arts, friendship, family, place, and study? And again, just to reflect on a rhetorical question, what is your intellectual community about, and how are you cultivating it? And those are the kinds of things, hopefully, my fellow panelists are going to talk about. I'm going to give some background on. But with that was a relatively long introduction, so it's like half my remarks. And so I'll turn it over here to Jeff. Thank you.
Start time, so it'll go over. There you go. All right, I'm grateful to Paul for proposing this conversation and for his passion, as you just heard, for intellectual community. Paul alluded to, I first met him at a graduate student Liberty Fund seminar that was convened at the Russell Kirk Library in Piety Hill. His conversations, I remember to this day, were so lucid and learned, so marvelously humane and interdisciplinary, I could hardly believe he was an economist. I mean, it still shocks me. They're rare, the economists. But having met at the Kirk Center in a communal setting, it's especially fitting to be on this panel with him on this topic. And I also want to thank, of course, Josh Bowman for his reinvigoration of this particular intellectual community. Josh was a Wilbur Fellow at the Kirk Center, and I like to think you've taken something of the spirit of Macosta with you here and your work to fashion the Ciceronian Society community into one of the really bright lights on the educational landscape. I think we all would agree with that. So thanks, Josh, for all your hard work. As Paul mentioned, this panel wasn't organized especially to be about deep ideas. You've had a lot of that, but to suggest models that give flesh and blood to the nature of intellectual community. Mine is a very descriptive overview that you'll hear, not a theoretical one, and about a specific type of intellectual community, one that's very organized and institutionalized version of intellectual community. I didn't submit a title for this talk. You didn't ask me. But let's call it the Macosta Mission Reconsidered. The Macosta Mission Reconsidered, for reasons that will become obvious. There are many and diverse examples of intellectual communities and approaches to the exchange of ideas that meet a human need to associate and seek community, friendship, understanding, wisdom. Given the state of the culture and the university in our time, fostering intellectual fellowship and community outside or alongside the university is an indispensable means of preserving traditions and renewing culture. As most of you know, Russell Kirk emphasized the importance of place, as Paul mentioned, importance of place in the process of human character formation and the strengthening of social mores and order. He believed that rootedness in a particular place fosters a sense of belonging and stability, which are essential for the development of community and culture. He argued that the erosion of local ties and the rise of rootlessness in modern society was contributing to moral and social disintegration. Kirk's vision of intellectual community was closely tied to this understanding of place. He argued that intellectual life thrives best in a context where persons are connected to their local environments and traditions. Kirk was critical of abstract intellectualism that often disregards the particularities of place and community. Instead, he championed a form of intellectual engagement that is embodied, tradition-bound, and deeply respectful of inherited wisdom, of living according to nature, which, as Burke wrote, is wisdom without reflection. Kirk's commitment to the principles of place and intellectual community is best exemplified in his own life through his attachment to and profound affection for the village of Mecosta. Mecosta, Michigan, where Kirk lived and worked, became a hub over time for like-minded scholars, writers, and thinkers who shared his vision. I was one of those inhabitants, serving as his literary assistant in 1986 and 87, and in the summer of 1989. In 1987, the British writer J.T. Ward visited Piety Hill, and in the pages of Roger Scruton's magazine, the Salisbury Review, he wrote about his visit. And he was so amazed and impressed that he gave the intellectual community he witnessed a name: the Mecosta Mission. Roger Scruton himself might have been inspired by Ward, for the next year, 1988, he came to Mecosta and led a weekend seminar with Dr. Kirk on politics and the moral imagination. I missed that. The Mecosta Mission was not just an intellectual endeavor, but a lived experience of community and tradition and place for all who are a part of it. It attracted what Dr. Kirk likes to say, the refugees from progress. Literally from refugees from totalitarianism, refugees from the modern university, all kinds and sorts of refugees. It served as a model for how intellectual life can be rooted in a specific locale, drawing strength from the reflective life lived in community and contributing to the broader culture, and in this case, the early American conservative movement. Now, I can tell you all about it or more about it myself, but it won't be as interesting or as colorful as hearing part of J.T. Ward's delightful description of his encounter with Kirk's curious intellectual community. And I'm going to do so by violating a rule I usually have when editing, especially with young people, to discourage long block quotes. But I'm in this case the exception. I hope you find that it was worth it. We'll see. So Ward begins his experience from England to Mecosta. He begins, State Highway 20 traverses about 25 gently undulating miles of corn and cattle country, with neat white farmhouses and great Dutch barns between Mount Pleasant, Michigan, and the forest land around Mecosta. Here is a typical mid-northwestern village of little wooden houses, accommodating some 400 people. Slightly above the township stands the Italianate brick and stone villa of Piety Hill, the ancestral home of Russell Kirk, his charming and ever-active wife, Annette, and their 4 daughters. Along a minor road lie the homes of students and friends and Professor Kirk's remarkable library, housed in a former woodmill. Beyond lies the forest, with its shy deer, mysterious paths, sinister little lakes, and occasional pitiful clearances where hardy folk once tried to live before succumbing to the cabin fever of bleak Michigan winters. Here is the backcloth to Kirk's ghostly Gothic novels. Piety Hill and the library are happy, busy places, refreshingly cool in hot summers and splendidly warmed by log fires in the icy winters. They are far from Washington or even from the state capital of Lansing. But the telephone rings incessantly as Mrs. Kirk accepts invitations for Russell to lecture, appear on TV or radio, or write for numerous journals. It gradually dawns on the new visitor that Mecosta is a special, informal, perhaps unique community. Around a blazing fire in the library, a lively discussion gathers. A young Scot discusses his researches on the 19th century British author and naturalist W.H. Hudson. Later, his talented future wife from Ann Arbor will give us superbly versatile musical entertainment. A North Carolina graduate examines Austrian politics. A Yugoslav explains his thesis on the Croatian economy. A local teacher talks on Pio Nono's ultramontanism. A young lady shyly reads a chapter from her historical novel for children. Everyone comments, and Russell sums up. It has been an enjoyable experience. Every visit to Mecosta is enjoyable. One follows Russell's flowing cloak for miles through the forest, hears Macabre's stories of local blood feuds, climbs to Red's bar overlooking the lake to discuss the elections, exchanges jokes and cigarettes with a man who turns out to be an Abyssinian prince. At a lakeside breakfast, a young waitress pointedly asks the denomination of a prominent prelate and what species of foreigner I am. A distinguished Polish exile seeks a job in the United States. A new PhD shows us his splendidly restored water-driven mill. In this old logging town, there lives a cosmopolitan community. That's one British view of Mecosta, of the community of surrounding Mecosta. The Russell Kirk Center itself, after the lively community line, Russell and Annette Kirk were married for 30 years, and they presided over this cosmopolitan community that I just described that War's called. This is a very typical example, by the way, at the time of what was happening weekend after weekend, month after month. It wasn't sort of odd to have this collection of refugees from all over the world, graduate students, locals, unwed mothers, politicians. I mean, there was all sorts of people gathering in conversation, in community, and friendship. It was really quite a remarkable, organic community. Russell and Annette were married 30 years, and they presided over this community. Throughout those years, there were frequent, as I said, weekend student seminars with leading conservative minds of the day, a bustling fellowship program, the publishing of the university Bookman, which Kirk founded and edited, and many campus lectures and debates. The Mecosta mission was already at that time functioning de facto as a nonprofit educational organization, an altogether unique haven of higher learning centered on a residential library and an Italian aid-style country house. The Russell Kirk Center grew from it and was founded the year after Dr. Kirk's death in 1994. And that night, Kirk and I signed the incorporation documents on Epiphany, January of 1995, so 30 years ago, another 30. And so we legally became the Russell Kirk Center for Cultural Renewal. And that began then a second block of 30 years, presiding over the institutionalization of the Mecosta mission and renewing its ambition to reconcile order, justice, and freedom in the service of cultural renewal. Of course, the Kirk Center, as I mentioned, is a place, it's a historic place where one man successfully labored in the cultural vineyard and produced some amazing intellectual fruit. As I suggested, Kirk's notion of place is deeply intertwined with his concept of the moral imagination, which he described as the ability to perceive ethical truths through the lens of literature, history, religion, and tradition. According to Kirk, places rich in historical and cultural significance serve as tangible manifestations of this moral imagination, providing individuals with a sense of belonging and purpose. The preservation of such places, therefore, is really crucial for maintaining the moral and cultural fabric of society. Ours is just one of the original, but very few historical places that are connected with the early days of the post-World War II conservative movement. At the time of Dr. Kirk's death, it was not obvious that the Mecosta mission could survive without the man who shaped that community. But it has. Russell Kirk is no longer physically present, but he's set strong ghosts on us, and he has been our touchstone. Talented students and writers have continued to come and take their place, guiding conferences and working with fellows. Resident fellows themselves are central to our community. Fellows are usually scholars working within the tradition of Christian and conservative humanism, the tradition that Kirk represented. They are not necessarily writing on projects only on Kirk. That's sometimes a misunderstanding. We're not a cult of Kirk, as sometimes I say to calm people. But he is our touchdown. He is our touchdown. And he does inspire our approach to conservative studies. We are, and in that sense, we are more intentionally now than in the past, a kind of school or academy of conservative studies, focused on history, principles, and the moral imagination. We have a world-class private archive, collection of letters, manuscripts, writings, and much else. In addition to research, writings, and residential opportunities for scholars, we'll be taking advantage of new opportunities in education today to offer a range of courses, certificates, and related academic programs, as well as new credentials. I think part of the ongoing vitality of the Kirk Center is due to the fact that we are genuinely committed to a living tradition and how best to understand and renew it. I have always believed that the most significant intellectual communities are organic, rooted in incarnational. While I'm a romantic when it comes to intellectual communities, Paul suggested that I also mention the challenges and difficulties of directing and sustaining them. Sustaining high-quality educational experiences is a lot of work and not always intellectual. It requires a blend of passion and conviction. It requires some degree of management expertise. Those who are doing or aspiring to doing intellectual community as an organized way of life will find many days filled with governance and leadership issues, strategic planning, financial management, fundraising, lots of fundraising, program evaluation, staff recruitment, strategic partnerships, marketing and communication, and the like. These are essential for successful and enduring intellectual communities at one level or another, but there's often a tension between the demands of management. Hopefully it's a healthy tension between the demands of management and the ideals of those implementing the program. It's always a tension and a point of conversation. The Kirk Center also has property that distinguishes us in some ways from others, and we are a residential center. We have property. We have 10 buildings, 8 houses, the Kirk Library, 15,000 books, and the Kirk Family Home, Piety Hill. We take inspiration from Thomas Jefferson's vision for the University of Virginia as an academical village. We are in a village. We at least have a pretense to be academical. We have alumni fellows, seminar participants, as well as a national and international network of friends and scholars who want to visit us. So an academic village seems right and humane. We've begun work on a site plan that will build out our village campus and provide our mission with more permanence. I want to conclude briefly with 2 ideals that have animated the Mecosta mission through the years, and I think are consistent with the charisma. Well, I know are consistent with the charisma of the Ciceronian Society, namely piety and joy. A joy, in our case, rooted in love for the permanent days. Russell Kirk regarded pietas as a cornerstone of a healthy civilization. He saw it as a guiding principle that safeguarded the continuity of cultural and moral norms across generations. His ancestral home, Piety Hill, was named Piety Hill. To Kirk, pietas was not only about individual virtue, but also about fostering a civil, social ethos that honored the past, respected the present, and looked forward to the future with a sense of duty and responsibility. With Burke, he believed that people will not look forward to posterity, who never look backward to their ancestors. Finally, Kirk exhorted young listeners not to give in to despair, however dark the times are, but to always let cheerfulness break through and to cherish the goods of life. He reminded students to remember life is worth living. His insights remind us that amidst our very serious duties and devotions, there is always room for joy and a lighthearted spirit. We at the Kirk Center remain dedicated to that and to one of Kirk's favorite maxims: conservatism is enjoyment. This is the Kirk Center's approach to intellectual community, one that remains in tune with our time while honoring the memory of those who have gone before us, and one motivated always by affection, by such a love for our place. Thank
you. Well, I too will begin in gratitude. This is my first Ciceronian Society, and it has been a true delight to be with you all these last several days. So thank you, Paul, for organizing the panel, inviting me. Thank you, Josh, for making sure this can actually happen every year. I want to begin my reflections with a question that I hope will set us on the right trajectory. So what do 6th century Benedictine monks in Italy and 18th century, the 18th century Republic of Letters across Europe, and this 21st century Ciceronian Society here in Virginia all have in common? Besides the fact that they all enjoy their alcohol. Besides that, they are, of course, all intellectual communities oriented toward a common goal and organized by a common rule or mode, but yet each in very different sorts of places. So in our conversation on this panel on building intellectual communities, I want to think especially about the relationship between such intellectual communities and place. Place constrains, refines, and directs an intellectual community, just the same way a pipe constrains and refines and directs water. In other words, place has a powerful shaping force on the character of an intellectual community. Place is, of course, not the only or even the most powerful shaping of forces. There are, of course, the personality of the founder, its current leader, the organizing principle, and so on, that also shape a community. But place is significant. From the first panel that we had in here with or on Seth Kaplan's book, Fragile Neighborhoods, we've already had the opportunity to think about the importance of place for our own communal life wherever we are. For my part, I aim to defend the good of the city as a place for shaping intellectual communities, specifically the one I am part of right now, namely Bethlehem College and Seminary. I recognize that on this panel, I'm representing an institution that is quite different in its geographic location than the other two, the Kirk Center and the American Institute for Economic Research, or Leadville. And I'm aware that I'm advocating for cities as good formative places in a time post-COVID and George Floyd riots when many people are wondering whether American cities are headed for a longer season of decline and dysfunction. I do not intend to present some grand vision that will address all the concerns folks may have about cities. Let me also be clear that my claim today is in no way that building an intellectual community in the city is more valuable than other places. Rather, my claim is far more modest. My aim is to describe how the city shapes the pursuit of learning in a Christian institution of higher education, namely at Bethlehem College and Seminary. And in describing the formative power of the city as a place, I hope to encourage a conversation here and hopefully beyond this conference with other Christians who are now building or aspire to build intellectual communities in a large city. So, here's where we're going. To do that, I want to first briefly define the city as an intensifier for good and for evil, characterized by density and diversity. Second, I'll describe the story of Bethlehem College and Seminary, and third and finally, give most of my time to defend the good of cities for shaping such intellectual communities. So first, defining the city. The theme of cities within biblical narrative and throughout human history underscores the basic reality that cities intensify, both for good and for evil. Cities are humanity en masse, and thus they take an individual human's capacity to do good or evil and amplify it. But what distinguishes the city from other parts of a country? Many may assume that population size sets cities apart from the suburbs or towns. But in fact, it's not population size, but population density. The suburbs surrounding Minneapolis have a combined total population that is much higher, but Minneapolis is much denser. The number of people per square acre is far greater. So density characterizes cities, and such density amplifies human good and evil. Beyond density, though, cities also are defined by their diversity, including the diversity in this very hotel in the hallway. I don't know what that throne is over there in the other room.
I knew you were speaking.
Yes. There is, of course, diversity in economic and social status, from the wealthy and elite to the poor and low-class folks that all share the same sidewalks. And of course, the many opportunities of a city attract a wide range of religious, ethnic, and cultural diversity, as often seen in the dramatic variety of food and restaurants available in a city. But there is another kind of diversity less often appreciated about cities, and that is the diversity of land use. A city brings onto the same block, and sometimes even into the same building, both residential and commercial, nonprofit and economic ventures. Putting these together then, cities are intensifiers for good and evil, characterized by density and diversity. Now, since cities are such intensifiers of both good and evil, they are both better and worse as places for building an intellectual community. They're better insofar as they amplify the opportunities for learning and growth by offering diverse experiences, exposing you to a wide range of cultures, and integrating commerce, academics, and the arts, political and legal pursuits through proximate, mixed land use. They are worse, however, insofar as they often interrupt and distract intellectual pursuits, sometimes hindering sustained contemplation. There is then a tension for an intellectual community pursuing sustained contemplation in a city. And it's one we are familiar with at Bethlehem College Seminary. So second, let me briefly describe Bethlehem's history and its current place in the city of Minneapolis. The story of the school really begins in 1871 when First Baptist Church of Minneapolis planted a new Swedish-speaking church, thanks to immigration, that eventually became Bethlehem Baptist Church in the 1920s when they transitioned from Swedish to English as the dominant language. That church thrived and grew and then dwindled to a small inner-city congregation by the late 1970s, when John Piper became the pastor in 1980. During his 33-year tenure as lead pastor, John Piper and one of the associate pastors, Tom Steller, began a pastoral training program that eventually became Bethlehem College and Seminary in 2009. The school, from its inception, not only operated on the campus of Bethlehem Baptist Church, but now also shares, or has always shared, a common confession with a movement of churches that all subscribe to the Bethlehem affirmation of faith. The school views Bethlehem Baptist and the movement of churches associated with it as an essential tether in its confessional identity. So then the location of the church and school also has significantly shaped its identity through its location in downtown Minneapolis, which I will now describe my third and final point on defending the good of cities for intellectual communities. The future of many American city centers and urban neighborhoods
is more uncertain than it has been in the last 30 years. So how do density and diversity serve as goods for shaping an intellectual community? Rather than describe this in the abstract, I want to defend the good of the city for my own intellectual community as an illustration for the wider good of cities for any intellectual community. And because cities are intensifiers for good and evil, I want to name two goods that cities offer for building intellectual communities while acknowledging the potential evils or tensions there. So first, cities challenge intellectual complacency. The diversity found in cities often confronts a person in ways that make it harder to retain unexamined assumptions about the world. We're less likely to believe all people from a certain ethnic or economic background are a certain way when we meet them on the sidewalk face to face. And you are more likely, especially repeatedly, and you are more likely to discover and grapple with new ideas, ways of thinking, and modes of life when you encounter them in the serendipitous happenings of a city. During Welcome Week every fall at Bethlehem, we encourage such discovery by hosting a city vision tour that exposes all new students to the vast variety of religious, cultural, and economic realities in the neighborhoods immediately around the school. So relatedly, the density of cities also forces us to grapple with our own and others' fallen humanity in ways we might not otherwise. Cities challenge the intellectual virtues by confronting students and even faculty alike with the need for moral virtues. When you step out onto the streets of Minneapolis around Bethlehem and are frequently confronted with the problems of humanity intensified, you quickly recognize that right thinking is not sufficient. But neither is a focus on right doing sufficient either, which is often the trap of the humanitarian or urban ministry. The density of cities intensifies the need for balancing both intellectual and moral virtues. Now, there is an inherent tension here between the good of challenging intellectual complacency and the good of sustaining intellectual pursuits. A cloistered intellectual life makes deep, sustained contemplation much more likely because it occurs without the distractions that a city often brings, especially if you're a young college student. Yet those very same things that could be distractions may be what serves a student's moral life, their maturation in those virtues. Bethlehem is in many ways still learning how to be both an intellectual oasis in the city while also adding the value of keeping the intellectual life grounded in the moral life through forcing our students to confront real problems like finding an apartment, learning street smarts and safety, and ministering to the poor. The second good of cities for intellectual communities that I want to name is this. Cities are centers for spreading. In his book, Centered Church, Tim Keller describes how planting Redeemer Presbyterian Church in the middle of New York City made it possible to reach the suburbs and towns outside the city. He writes, "You can't reach the city from the suburbs, but you can reach the suburbs from the city. Cities are like a giant heart, drawing people in and then sending them back out. Students come to cities to attend school and then they graduate and move out. Singles meet in the city, get married, and move out to the suburbs when children are born. Immigrants come to the city and live in ethnic enclaves, but as they amass assets and become more established in their new country, they move outward to gain additional space for their growing families. In each case, the movement is from the center outward." End quote. Because cities naturally draw people in and then send them back out, the best way to develop an intellectual community there is to be prepared to spread. Bethlehem's very mission statement accents spreading. Both church and school exist to spread a passion for the supremacy of God in all things for the joy of all peoples through Jesus Christ. The school does that by training pastors in the seminary and future church members and leaders in the college. A growing number of graduates from the seminary have planted churches in the Twin Cities, its surrounding suburbs, and beyond, with many Bethlehem College graduates becoming its members and leaders. And this has happened on a smaller scale across the United States and internationally as well. So spreading, in other words, has characterized Bethlehem as a community, and that's been remarkably facilitated by its place in the center of Minneapolis. Yet again, there is a reasonable objection to the good of spreading, and it's this. Cities are too transient for long-lasting intellectual community. People come and go quickly in cities. Few remain for life. And therefore, intellectual communities are harder to sustain in the hurly-burly of city transients. It's hard to maintain the momentum of the shared enterprise of an intellectual community in a specific place when its members keep leaving, especially when you are deeply committed to in-person community like Bethlehem. This is, I think, an important objection that I believe the localism advocated in both Jane Jacobs' book on American cities and Wendell Berry's essay on the agrarian mind addresses well. That's perhaps a topic for Q&A. For now, I will only offer an initial answer by suggesting that overcoming this problem requires first that the community call a few people to stay rather than to spread. While I grew up, my dad was an elder at a church plant in our city, and he frequently used the catchphrase to call people to stay in the San Francisco East Bay by saying, live, work, church, Berkeley. He was calling people to consider staying long-term in the city, to live, to work, and to do church life in one integrated place. The strength of the spreading that a city offers must be balanced, in other words, by the call for some to stay and sustain the capacity to send. Bethlehem, both church and school, is itself, I think, in a season of revisioning how it calls some of its people to stay, even as it prepares many to go. So, in conclusion, I think for each of the intellectual communities I mentioned at the beginning, those Benedictine monks, Enlightenment intellectuals, and this society here, the places where they pursue the life of the mind forms the character and quality of their community. I've argued that cities offer goods for forming such healthy intellectual community that Christians, especially in cities, should recognize and pursue. Bethlehem is attempting to do that for the long term in Minneapolis as we seek to build and sustain a city campus that leverages the goods of the city while limiting its drawbacks. And in closing, I would just suggest that the growing challenges on the horizon for many American cities presents an important opportunity for Christians in particular to consider how best to develop and sustain intellectual communities that can serve those cities and spread from them.
All right, so just briefly, we're going to actually pull chairs up here and have a conversation. Two more things I want to mention when it comes to intellectual community that I didn't bring up earlier, but that will maybe come up in the Q&A, is the importance of hospitality and the importance of resources, right? Hospitality is a central part of any kind of community that's going to be flourishing. And so hopefully we'll talk a little bit about hospitality. And then, of course, resources. Jeff mentioned the fundraising, right? Lots and lots of fundraising. And so part of what we need to think about if we're building these kinds of places is what sorts of resources do we have? What sorts of resources do we need, right? And this is in terms of buildings and funding and who's going to buy the books? How are people going to travel in if they're coming in for things? These are things that I think about, as they've alluded to. I'm trying to build intellectual community in Leadville. I have an old convent that's been turned into a bed and breakfast, and so I'm thinking about how to use that. And then there's resources at the church I'm a part of. And so I'm very interested in this kind of question of building intellectual communities. And again, Russell Kirk and Francis Schaeffer, I think, are models here where they just decided to do their own thing. And so this has long been my hope to do academia on my own terms. And, there's benefits to that, there's costs to that in terms of how you do that. But they have both set up different models around their families, around their homes, around hospitality, around a place. And so we're going to be talking about that as well. So let's go ahead and move up here and we'll do Q&A. I have a few questions I'm going to raise for the panelists first, and then we'll open it up to questions from the floor.
Where do you sit there? You try in the middle.
Yeah. All right. So Jeff, my first question is for you. So you read that account of all the people who travel and were part of Mecosta. There were people coming and going all the time. And I was struck by how Mecosta was really the reverse of so much segregation that we see in society. Social segregation, people segregating by neighborhood, by education, by activity. What you're describing is almost the exact opposite, right? People from all over, different walks of life. But I want you to address, what is enduring about the community of Mecosta? It strikes me one of the challenges is that there seems to be a lot of transitoriness, people coming and going. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the idea of friendship and the idea of networks and the role of travel in terms of, Dr. Kirk himself traveled extensively, but then came back, and people would come back and visit more. So could you talk a little bit about the challenges and how that looks like, where there's a place that's like a locus of activity, and yet there's also a lot of sort of transitoriness as well?
Well, Dr. Kirk would have liked to have stayed, I think, in Mecosta more often, but he had some of these practical matters, and he's got 4 daughters, and got to put them through college, and so he had to go raise money, so he had to leave to do that, and came back.
Yep.
Well, I mean, the place is permanent. Mecosta is Mecosta. I mean, if you can spend 2 weeks as a fellow, or 6 months, or whatever, I mean, you come back 5, 6 years later, 8 years, 10 years later, you feel like it's the same thing. It's like Brigadoon. You walk in and out of the clouds, and there it is. So I mean, the place is not transient. It's rooted, and it's permanent. And I think that the family element of it, well, that's going to be hard to sustain, and that's a challenge for us, long term. Has been part of the permanence of it. First, it was Dr. Kirk and Annette, but I think Annette is the energetic center for so long. As you say, Dr. Kirk comes and goes, but Annette is the great organizer, and they were perfectly complemented as a husband and wife to sort of do this kind of work. I should say my wife Cecilia, Dr. Kirk's second daughter, is here, and we're perfectly complimented too. But no, I think they were. Dr. Kirk was kind of shy and reserved, and would just have been content to his bookishness, and Annette was, Russell, now we've got a Polish immigrant that needs to come over. We got 10 Cambodians. We just got called by the immigration services down in Detroit, and they want them to come up. And we have 3 or 4 graduate students have already arranged, and he's like, okay. So all of a sudden it's swirl, and he loved it. I mean, it pulled him out, and there was a side of him that came out. So, but she's the hospitality in the center. I think that's a permanent. So family, place is permanent. I mean, the nature of having a kind of dynamic community, one that you said, like you said, is not segregated. I mean, we're quite diverse. In fact, Mecosta itself is home to sort of a part of the community there was also part of our lives as assistants and others. Were what they called old settlers. They were blacks that came up after the Civil War on the railroad, and they just settled there and had families there and integrated in the community, and became leaders, and just intermarried. And so there's the plaques, and Annette was involved in restoring a schoolhouse for them. So and that was part of the. So it was literally integrated, like in the sense of what most people think of when they first mention integrative. And then you have the totalitarian, the refugees from Progress and from over graduate students and others. So I think the place, and at least if you have some anchor of like a core person that's there for an extended period of time, and that's going to have like 60 years there, right? 30 years is the Mecosta mission, just the Kirks doing their thing. Now 30 years is the Russ Kirk Center, is a formally organized thing. And so we've had that continuity. Cecilia and I are trying to continue that as we go. But I think if you got some measure of that kind of people continuity in the place, you can carry on.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I mean, I think many of us can speak to the influence of the Kirk Center. over the years, right? Though I haven't spent months and months there, I've been there multiple times. It's a kind of place that lives in our imagination, and I've met many of the people in this room at sort of Kirk events or ISI events. And so, again, the one of the things we didn't really get into is like there's intellectual community where people live together for long periods of time, but then there's also more of a network intellectual community where people come together periodically and disperse. And again, this conference is an example of that. But it's
fellows,
right, exactly, people who come.
Usual things like colleges.
Yeah, so within intellectual community, there's not like a one-size-fits-all by any means. And this kind of leads to a question I have for Zach, and then we'll open it to the floor. So if you have questions, get ready to come and ask them. Zach, as you were talking, I was thinking about the children's story, City Mouse, Country Mouse, right? And, in City Mouse, Country Mouse, you have the mouse in the country and the mouse in the city, and they're both like, wouldn't it be great to live in the city? And wouldn't it be great to live in the country? And they switch places, and they discover they actually hate it, and there's all kinds of problems they're not used to. And I just think about that, like the city intellectual community and the country intellectual community. And, we're a little bit more kind of country intellectual community, and you're more the city intellectual community. So my question for you is, how do you think rural or remote intellectual communities and urban intellectual communities ought to kind of relate to each other, interact with one another? They're kind of different kinds of things. They certainly share some elements of friendship and pursuing truth and goodness, but they're also very different in kinds of their structures and how they work, but they ought to be working together or related to each other. So I'm curious what your thoughts are in terms of how should they interact with each other, and also maybe how ought we to guard against the problem in City Mouse, Country Mouse of sort of wanting this imagined ideal that we don't have, whether we're in the country and we wish we had more of the vibrancy of the city, or in the city we wish we had more of the rest and quietness and repose of the country.
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, I think first we should name your intellectual community in Leadville. So we got Mecosta Mission, and we got the Leadville Luminaries. So I think maybe relating to this community first, like the value of a networked community that is not tied to a specific place is, I think, what makes it possible, or what can really support the different sorts of communities from different places, sharpening, strengthening, encouraging one another. So the fact that this is happening when we're coming from all sorts of different places, we can bring those perspectives, those insights that we've gained from our particular communities to something bigger, a bigger network. And I mean, that's the Republic of Letters, they're all thinking about the questions of the Enlightenment from very different countries, places, locales. Some of them were more embodied, like the French salons, but I think that requires some intentionality. So I'm coming this summer to help you guys do an intellectual retreat, and hope to get you up to Bethlehem again soon. So that sort of thing, Country Mouse, City Mouse, trading places temporarily can be really valuable.
Yeah.
And I think whichever place you're in, whichever sort of place that you maybe have proclivities or loves for, learning from others who love the other sort of place a lot can really strengthen what you're doing there.
Great. All right, we'll open it up for questions. Folks have questions.
Yeah.
All right.
I know you don't.
This is just for the record.
Yeah. So I'm on the record. So I think. Okay. So I think one of the things that's really sad about this discussion is not the wonderful innovations that you're describing, but the fact that almost everybody here is involved in a university or a college run by people so addicted to time-wasting stupidity that we have to say, like, what institution could we come up with where scholars would get together and talk about ideas and scholarship? So one thing that might be a worthwhile project is if we put our heads together and thought about, and I'm asking all of you, what can we do to pressure administrators who often resemble humans to overcome their time-wasting stupidity addictions And what can we do to sort of push back as faculty members and say, a lot of what you're asking us to do is frankly idiotic. And of course, if that were the case, we could all model intellectual community in place in front of students and wouldn't have to go away from them to do this. So I think that's something to think about too, is how can we pressure the institutions which exist? So welcome your comments.
No, it's a great question. I mean, I'll give a response and let either the panelists give a response. I think, there's at least two ways to address it. One is, you kind of opt out, right? It's like almost the John Galt of like, I'm going to leave and go do my own thing. And that's sort of the route I've taken, somewhat intentionally, somewhat unintentionally. But always wanting to do academia more on my terms as opposed to academia's terms as best as possible. And maybe that'll apply pressure over time if there's enough alternatives to traditional college university that will force change in kind of a competitive way, right? So it's you start a new company to compete with the older companies and then force them to change if they want to stay in business. So that's one approach, but there's also more of a reforming institutions, building institutions. I'll let maybe Zach tackle that if he has thoughts on, reforming institutions, a time to build. Maybe you can draw from that.
Well, first of all, I'm very thankful that Bethlehem is not that sort of institution, because I am one of the administrators there. At least I don't think my faculty think that. And we're also very young and trying to disrupt that kind of, we are providing an alternative, at least attempting to. But I think, conservatives in general in America have tended to leave rather than stay. And I think over time that's been bad. We've started new institutions. I was never at a secular university and left that. But I think there's, for those of you who maybe are, I do not doubt the difficulty, but I think being creative about how do you stay in a way that's going to be successful long-term, not just for you, but for those who come after you. And I think what you were saying, Jeff, about it's not just about the ideas, right? The kind of leadership at the management level or the fundraising level to make those ideas into reality is really important. So if you have those kinds of skills and interests, even if you are very much an intellectual sort of person and love the ideas, lean in there. And I think that would be one way to reform those otherwise idiotic institutions.
Well, and to soften my answer a little bit, I think part of it is a little bit sad. It is a little bit sad for sure, but the other thing is, maybe you need to build a parallel intellectual community within your church or within your group of students. And many of us do this, right? Whether it was book clubs or billion centers, so there might be other ways where you can stay with the institution and try to slog it out, but you can also have another part that is actually more enriching when the institutional part is soul deadening. So that might be a way to help you endure in that context. But yeah, there is something, again, contexts are different, but I think there's different approaches to it.
I've lived my life on the periphery of it. I'm not in a position really to tell people, advise people what to do inside the belly of the horrible beast. But I think what I was thinking is just what you said. I've known so many faculty through the years. I've worked with hundreds of faculty, a lot of good friends, and most of them were very unhappy, oppressed, treated badly. So they were really down, and so some of them left for other pastures, and some stuck it out, but it wasn't. But I would always suggest to them, why don't you just walk across the street, outside the university, across the street, and just start a discussion club? You mentioned the salon, whatever. Just start something nearby, alongside. Bring your best students, just a few good students, great conversations. Stuff will start to build. I don't know what kind of permanent structure it might have, but it might take on some kind of life outside. You might even find someone who wants to give you money to stand all outside the university to, show a different path, give true education and impact students' lives. So you could still be in it and just walk across the street and build and see what happens.
Yeah. That's right. And that's why, I use the term intellectual community as opposed to university or college, as it's something that can exist there, but can also exist in parallel or can exist in other settings. And I think it's important to pursue that, especially in those kinds of contexts that you're describing. Good other questions? Let's see. bold ones get to ask questions.
Thanks. Actually, I have a follow-up question, sort of along the same lines of Bill's question. I'm sure you've heard for years about unhappy college faculty. It's my sense, others can weigh in here. I'm somewhat new to Ciceronian society. I think the numbers are growing. There's a sense in which sort of the center is not holding of higher education itself. Look at the numbers and the minimal energy attending things like national English conferences, history, my discipline. They're just worthless. They're absolutely worthless. And I so appreciate Ciceronian society. This will be a sort of a question eventually for Josh as well as for our panelists. I so appreciate Kirk and Kirk's World, Ciceronian society, but I wonder if you have any thoughts on a type of academic that I'll sort of try to sketch out, who is not, they would, no offense intended, but they'd see sort of Kirkians as true believers, right? Ciceronians as true believers. They don't know where they sit, right? They sort of have half a foot outside of their university, out of mainstream higher education themselves. They go quiet, they go home early. They might not be attracted to what is seen as sort of a full loaf venture. Is there such a way of something that is, even in appearance, this is unfair, but even in appearance, not quite so purist, as able to be built and able to ultimately refine the task of learning, God willing, help and move forward our society.
So you're saying, how do you entice them into being a true believer?
That would be one answer. Just your thoughts.
Well, I think, again, this is what we're, I was reminded in college when we were graduating, they always said, till your little patch of garden, you're part of the world. And, what Kirk and conservatives in general are not about is sort of totalitarian or totalizing their things of Ciceronian must become a 10,000 person conference and everyone must join. No. Josh is already having nightmares. But what we're doing is we're encouraging those who come. We're making it a place for ideas to grow. And it's a good question. What are other venues for that? So something come to mind, the Heterodox Academy folks are trying to do things like that. We have a number of friends from UT Austin here, and that's kind of a new kind of project as well, kind of in this moment. Again, kind of a different project, not so that everybody can join in, though I think that they're trying to recruit people pretty aggressively. And so I don't have a direct answer, but I think one is we need to think through, are there other kinds of associations that we should form or that we can kind of plug people into, the people you're talking about who are looking for something else, even if this isn't exactly their cup of tea. And maybe having them come to see what it's like to get inspiration to do something else is I think worth thinking about, especially if you have people in mind. Hey, here's how this group is doing, and can we do something for psychologists, or can we do something for historians who are a little bit more middle of the road, who really just want to talk about history and not about, critical race theory or whatever. So those are some of my initial thoughts. Yeah.
So I think there's discipline-specific societies that could be alternatives to the ones that you were describing that are sad. But I think, speaking of place, I think for many of you who may be in that situation where your home institution is not a place where you can thrive intellectually, I think, trying to find some alternative where you are, one possibility. So I think at the University of Minnesota, there is a Christian study center called the Anselm House. Executive director is Brian Bowman, who's a friend of mine, and I think he has a really compelling vision for Christian study centers as formative colleges within the secular university that have, credentialed PhD level tutors whose primary role is to lead students through the great text as a complement to whatever discipline-specific work they're doing, whether that's undergraduate up to PhD, and to also serve the faculty at that secular university in such a way that they are formed, continue to be formed in their intellectual and moral life through that Christian Study Center. So I think there's a number of those that are starting there. I just heard from Chris Armstrong this week that they're trying to start a lot more soon. And so I think that would be kind of in our American context as secular or state universities, an alternative that could really take off and serve the sorts of people here who like this kind of community.
Question particularly for Jeff, I suppose, to everybody. It seems like when a community, an organic community, gets to a certain size, it almost, at least in their contemporary settings, almost, I wouldn't say necessarily, but almost automatically subjected to the idea that it has to be subjected to principles of management.
Right.
And so there are whole schools that are teaching all those disciplines of marketing and finance, IT and facilities, and risk management, accreditation, compliance. And those things seem to strangle something out of what it is we're aspiring to. What do you think are, if we have to try to understand how to manage, we got a whole library of playbooks. But as we're trying to do the more subjective, more qualitative task here, like where do we go for the playbook?
Yeah, I don't think there's a exact playbook. I mean, depending on the kind of when you're talking a little bit about scale, I think, and I think also just in terms of, when does a community get to a certain size that it even starts to fragment, turn in on each other, break away, or whatever? I mean, I think the sociologists generally say it's been around 150 people or so in the tribes, and they would start breaking off. They would develop certain different divisions of labor, and things would begin to change. Now that's one. So if you're in a college, once you go over 150 or 170, and even there are a lot of small grade books colleges that don't go beyond a certain size for the reasons you suggest, because things start to break off. The community starts to become less integrated whole. So I think I think it's the size of the scale. Institutions are organic, I think. So there's an organic theory of politics. I don't know if there's organic theory of institutions, but there is an organic side. They're sort of embodied. We've talked about them being embodied in a certain way. So I think that if you have an organic view of things, then you know that you have to kind of know your skill, your fighting, your weight. In boxing they have fighting weights, right? Somebody's natural weight is featherweight is a certain weight, a middleweight, welterweight, light heavyweight. So there are certain communities that are just naturally, bigger. But if they can be, their communities can become disfigured by just getting too heavy, too big, or too thin, too anemic, so that they can't do the basic things that function in the community. And I think you have to really figure out in a way where your natural institutional body weights, your scale is, and then manage, right to that point. But if you get all of a sudden vision, you should say, okay, well, the Kirk Center in 5 years, if it's $2.5 million with its properties and its programs, it can do what it's supposed to do, meet its needs, and that's all right. But then if you get to that point and say, I want to be like the Heritage Foundation, I think we should be $10 or $20 million or whatever, and you start to chase that, then you'll destroy and disfigure your community, I think. Or especially if you have a lot of problems, internal management problems, financial problems, whatever, and you start to shrink, then you have another problem, so you starve. So it's tricky. There's not a playbook. It's more kind of a little bit of a feel. You have to have experience and a kind of realistic sense of your kind of scale and your natural body weight, and then kind of be content with that. I try and keep it there. And to go up or go low presents different kinds of problems. You have to always adjust. There's no perfect way. You just kind of do it as you go. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's very conservative in that sense. There's not an exact.
It's like we're talking about doing something that's actually different from what's being managed. And
Well,
trying to get how are you instructed in that?
Well, and like part of the idea here too, I mean, this is why like the particular place, particular community matters, right? In terms of what your giftings are and who there is with you, right? And so there are things that Baylor can do that most other places can't do because it's really large. And there are all kinds of problems that Baylor has because it's really large. And so you've got to kind of be thinking through in your context. This is kind of the encouragement, right? What are the things that we aspire to that are shared, right? So there's the one and the many. What's the one or the common thing we share, right? This idea of friendship, this idea of pursuing ideas, this idea of community. These things I think are all sort of essential in any kind of intellectual community. I mean, they have the word in the name. But the way that we do that can look very different depending on the people, the resources, and the audience, what we're trying to do. And so, the school, St. Dunstan's, is very different from what Bethlehem College and Seminary is trying to do, which is very different in some ways from what the Kirk Center is trying to do or what I'm trying to do. And yet all of them share sort of this deep underlying idea that the pursuit of truth matters, that books matter, that conversation and community matters, and that we want to be faithful in that in our setting and be very purposeful about the kinds of things that we do in order to foster the community that we're in.
I was just thinking of Peter Drucker because I used to read him when I was getting involved in management in different ways. And he argued deep from history, from the Renaissance and forward, that management is fundamental, is a liberal art. In some ways, the liberal art in a humanistic way. And I mean, it's very prominent through a certain line of management literature. So it really is a liberal art. It's an art. It's not a science to do kind of the things we do. But I think that's important to keep in mind.
You want to take one more question? You want to go, Josh?
One more question, then we'll...
All right, does anybody want to take one last question?
Thank you all for the great panel. Just really practical. What does hospitality and recipes look like at your respective institutions? How did Mr. and Mrs. Kirk feed so many people that came to visit? Like, are the beans being soaked overnight every night? Like, what does it look like feeding so many
Mrs.
people?
Kirk doesn't cook. She is not a good cook at all. She would have. That's why she had so many assistants and other visitors, because they cooked amazing food for everybody, and that's the truth.
And you definitely had seat assignments. Like, you better sit where Mrs. Kirk tells you to sit.
Right. Well, and just a comment. So Edith Schaefer has a biography about Labrie, and she talks about like having to whip up, dinner for 80 people, at the last minute, and you have to have a team. Yeah, there has to be support and community to be able to do that kind of thing. So some of you can plan, some of it you just have to have a network to rely on.
You're going to talk to my wife, Cecilia. She's whipping up the food for 20, 30 people on a regular basis over the months here, so she'd probably be able to
tell you about the beans.
I don't think she's a beans person.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I'll just offer some closing comments. This is kind of the extended ending of the event. I was just thinking about the different the times I wanted to jump in and be like, yes, what they were talking about. I couldn't have planned that better. What you guys said in terms of both promotion of our partners and our friends and the Ciceronian Society itself. I was remembering. I almost teared up listening to J.T. Ward. J.T. Ward, his description of the Kirk Center. That's a vision of heaven, frankly. It also occurred the year I was born, I think. So I was didn't want to rub that in Jeff's face right away. But I also remember that I completed my dissertation at the Kirk Center. I basically called Annette at some point and said, Annette, I need to come up there and write this, or I'm going to die. As many of you have finished your dissertation, you spent like 3 years thinking about it, and then eventually, I guess I better write it. And I did, and I remember I was in the library late at night, and a bat came out of nowhere. Annette says she doesn't remember this ever happening in the library ever, and it came out and hit me in the head. And I said, at first I was just, I encountered bats many times in my life, but it's just, and then I realized like that's the most Russell Kirk thing I've ever seen. But there's also a sense in which being a Wilbur Fellow and being part of that community has also connected me to others. Usually, we can do this year later, but there's always a Wilbur Fellow picture usually here at the Ciceronian Society, because as you get attached to a place like that, it becomes a part of you. It's a place that I go to for refuge. When we had this life-changing donation a year ago, after saying, Lord have mercy on me, a sinner, what am I going to do? I immediately, my first reaction was, to go to the Kirk Center and pray and read and journal and just figure out what am I going to do. And I'm very grateful for that refuge. It is like Rivendell. Kirk thought of himself as Elrond. Well, here at the end of another successful Ciceronian Society conference, I hope you've enjoyed your time with us. And I look forward to one last evening to discuss all manner of things, some intellectual, some not so much, and probably with glow sticks listening to quinceañera music. That'll be a new one. Don't forget to use the QR code for making video testimonial reviews. Those are hugely helpful for us in promoting ourselves and just getting a sense of our personality. Some of you have already sent in some funny ones that have no promotional value at all. They're edifying to me, if no one else. But they can be a great resource. This society, its many and varied characters that we attract really shapes who we are. And whatever successes we've had, I believe, has become because of who has shown up. So thank you. In the time remaining, we'll be giving out our final 2 awards and offer thanks to many people. But my job now is to announce our major project for this year, and that is to finally create the Ciceronian Society membership program. It's very much related to what we just talked about in this panel. The purpose of this Ciceronian Society membership program is to promote intellectual friendship among Christians and increase engagement within our community of scholars in the time between annual meetings. This is something many of you have asked for, and we hope it's a way for you to work together and share resources and opportunities. On a regular basis, for example, I'm asked to share employment opportunities with our group, and inevitably that text or email says, I would love to have a Ciceronian as a colleague. I think that says a lot about us. We also hope that once everything is set up, you can use membership directories and communications to organize additional smaller get-togethers in the places you live and work, maybe in Leadville, and certainly at the Kirk Center. That will happen at some point. These could take any form you wish, from reading groups and lectures to bonfires and poetry readings, workshops, potlucks, and mini concerts. By the way, when I said last night we were talking, trying to brainstorm some things, and I said, like bonfires and books. And I was like, oh no. I didn't mean it, like reading around a bonfire. The books do not go in the bonfire. I'm sure many gatherings will correspond to other events where you find each other as well. I mean, one of the things we're going to do is have merch that you can use to say, hey, you're a Ciceronian, let's get together. Maybe y'all can get together and make some homebrewed beer or garden or discuss the implications of the latest season of Bluey. I've cried through at least 3 episodes. At least 3. Last night we had an impromptu, just an example, we had an impromptu group discussing the Aubrey Maturin Master and Commander series by Patrick O'Brien. We just want to make it easier for members to help to connect with one another in different ways. Last night I was getting an invitation from some guys at church. Some dude, he's getting sap from a maple tree in his backyard. He's like, hey, I'm going to boil this room, make syrup. You want to drink beer and talk about stuff? And I was like, man, that sounds awesome. That's the kind of community that we all long for. So how will it work? Membership is by invitation only and is at the discretion of the board of directors. Our goal is to launch our first year of membership this coming July 1st, and invitations will head out over the next few months. We'll have student and family memberships. You'll each get one of these Stazzy ties for the ladies. Let me get a model here. Do I have a model for the scarf? Did Rachel, where'd she go? Fail. Okay. Anyways, or did Jeff here? No, he's not here. Jeff made it into an ascot somehow. I don't even know how to work. Anyways, so initial invitations will primarily be sent to those who have attended our conference, such as y'all, and then later there will be opportunities for current members to nominate others. Please sign up for our newsletter and check back with us on our website and social media and periodically for additional updates. But perhaps you're wondering if you really are Ciceronian. To that question, I offer the following observation in the rhetorical spirit of the great American philosopher Jeff Foxworthy. If you've ever drank bourbon with a heretic and a schismatic and enjoyed every minute, you might be a Ciceronian. If you ever felt the need to defend James Patterson on Twitter, you might be a Ciceronian. But also, if you feel the need to attack James Patterson on Twitter, if you measure your coffee consumption in gallons and your beer consumption in Roman amphora, you might be a Ciceronian. If you could quote the Bible, the Silmarillion, the Nicomachean Ethics, Wendell Berry, and the Big Lebowski in the same conversation, you might be a Ciceronian. If your code name for the deep state is Cataline, you might be a Ciceronian. If you ever got tipsy and bought a book, you might be a Ciceronian. In fact, if a book ever showed up at your door a week later, and you don't remember buying it, but you remember drinking with the author, you might be a Ciceronian. True story. If the punchlines in your jokes are in Latin, you might ipso facto be a Ciceronian. Here's a few for those who have been around for a while. So this is a little inside jokes, but if you hear me shout, "You're my best friend," and you know what state of mind I'm in, you might be a Ciceronian. If obscure phrases from past papers like psychically anthropoid and concubines of the Illuminati are not new to you, you might be a Ciceronian. In fact, you're an old one. I can't remember who submitted this particular one, but if you've ever explained what a limit experience is to a classical Christian school administrator, you might be a Ciceronian. I made the mistake of asking for submissions on this one. Then on a more serious note, if you went into academia longing to talk about great books and big ideas, but discovered you actually had to come here to find that, you might be a Ciceronian. If you long for a less superficial civic discourse and more intellectually vibrant churches, you might be a Ciceronian. If a conference that addresses timber framing, Shakespeare farming, monsters, the Constitution, and theology seems perfectly normal to you, you might be a Ciceronian. If you think friendship is key for a fruitful intellectual life, you might be a Ciceronian. If you believe that tradition, place, and things divine are themes worth exploring and celebrating, you might be a Ciceronian. If you wish I would stop talking because you're thirsty, you can leave. So thank you so much for your prayers and support this year. Thank you to our donors, known and unknown, to the board of directors for believing me. Thank you to the advisory board for your wisdom and enthusiasm. And above all, we give glory to the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, King of kings and Lord of lords. He is the author and perfecter of our faith, our creator, sustainer, and redeemer. He called us friends first, that we might be friends together. May we never forget that it is only by the grace of God that we ever pull this off. May he continue to bless us in the days ahead. And finally, it's time for me to introduce my very good friend and board chairman, Bill Batchelder IV. He helped us secure all this AV equipment, and he helps me on a weekly, if not daily basis, running the society. And if him coming up here makes you simultaneously excited and a little nervous, you might be a Ciceronian.
So some chair business here and some prize business so that we can get to Patterson, which I know is what you're all waiting for. By the way, did you see that beautiful throne across the hall? I really wanted to get that for James. So we could just sit in that and address you.
I am a pretty lady.
The prettiest. So, chair business, prize business. First of all, I want to one more time recognize Josh Bowman for all of his work. As the chair of the Ciceronian Society, I want briefly to recognize the board members because this is a lot of work and we're blessed with a lot of help. Please stand when your name is called. The lovely and talented James Patterson, President. Our local hosts and dear friends, John Robinson and Bob Subrick. They actually might be doing local hosting things, so there we are. With them, Michael Harding, who's been helping to edit the Sower, our podcast. Rudy Hernandez. Is Rudy here? There he is. Ethan Alexander Davey. Our licensed over-the-road 24-hour long-distance driver, Ben Peterson. If you have suggestions tonight, please approach them or approach me because we do want to hear them. I recognize our friends who are departing from the board after their terms. Robinson, we've already recognized as our local host. Also, Ashleen Magnulo, who cannot be with us this week. And especially Chris Annadale. Chris has been with us from the absolute beginning. He has offered extraordinary service on the board. He's been editing the podcast, often running the podcast, and recording the conferences. And he's going to take a little time off from the board as his term is at the end, and we recognize Chris especially. At the same time, please stand. I would like to recognize Claire Agata, who is herself already proven to be a tireless friend of the Ciceronian Society, and is now, I can announce, a board member.
I also want to recognize Kevin Slack, the editor of Pietas, who could not be with us this year. As some of you know, Kevin is always very busy. All the audio gear and screens were loaned to us free of charge by the Pittsburgh Fringe Festival, where my wife, Shayla Batchelder, is founder and executive director. If the Ciceronian Society would finally get around to offering movement pieces and one-person shows, she might come see us. The always sunny Philip Reef once said that the first impulse of one intellectual upon meeting another is contempt. But that has never been the case here. This is a group of friends. We have many new friends here this year, and we're honored that you and old friends alike have come to spend time with us, present your ideas to us, dialogue with us, even pray with us in the morning. The board will never compromise on tradition, place, and things divine. But these themes leave a wide range of views on many things. This is the beauty of having this society and having you all, each of you, in it. These conferences work because you are here, with your excellent papers, with your enthusiasm, with your forbearance as board members go in and out of your sessions because we get texts because things are problematic. We thank you. Godspeed, all of you, on your way home, and we hope to have you return and see us again in a year's time. We thank also Peter Haworth, our founder, and his family, who have always remembered Ciceronian, and we salute them at the close of another conference in gratitude for Peter's vision and for their generosity. So thank you to the Haworths. So, I have the honor of introducing the William G. Batchelder III Memorial Award for the study of place, a word on my late father, who passed away just before our conference 3 years ago. Dad was a friend of the society, and he attended in 2018 when we were at Hope. He was in particular a partisan of place. Dad was one of the happy few who actually realized his life's ambition, which was to be Speaker of the Ohio House of Representatives. He had been a member from 1969 to 1998, again from 2007 to 2014, and thank God he managed to become Speaker from 2011 to 2014, in part with the help of a friend who is here in this room, which we always will remember. Throughout his time in office, Dad was known for his integrity. This was best exhibited when he had the distinction of chairing an investigative committee and then referring both the Democrat Speaker and the Republican leader of the House to a prosecutor. The Republican President of the Senate and the Democrat Speaker of the House to a prosecutor. But he showed this in ways great and small. That integrity was underwritten by his Christian faith and also, I believe, by his great love of place. My father loved Medina County, Ohio, which he represented all those years in the legislature with a near religious reverence. He loved every township and could tell the story of heroes from Medina, Ohio, like Colonel H.G. Blake and A.I. Root. He loved Ohio with that same reverence and revered the people in its past that made it great, particularly his lifelong hero, Senator Robert Taft. When the National Party attempted to recruit Dad to run for Congress, a seat he surely would have won, he refused. And in part, he refused it because it meant he would have had to leave Ohio. Also, if he went to Washington, D.C., typically you'd get to just about the outer belt, and when he was furiously angry, his temples would involuntarily flare in and out. And so when I was little, and the first time I saw that, I said, "But Dad, we're at our nation's capital." And he said, looking around, "That fascist Franklin Roosevelt and this damn architecture," and just seethed for the entire 3 days we were there. When he returned to the house, there was a security. They put security in because, after all, Al-Qaeda had harbored a deep desire to destroy the Ohio legislature. And Dad blew right past the security because he wasn't used to it and he wasn't paying any attention. So he went right past it, and a lady yelled, "Sir, sir, do you work for the state?" And my father turned around and said, "No, madam, I work against it." At any rate, Dad understood that abstracted love for mankind was nonsense, that we love the places we are from because of the people in them, the particular people. We serve mankind through our particular service to those particular people, male and female of every heritage and race, that live among us in the places we are from. Ohio is not Texas, is not New York, is not Florida, is not California, thank God, and never should be. Ideas and forces which wish to homogenize those places must be resisted. Which brings us to this year's award. Like Rousseau loving mankind, while being incapable of loving any particular individual beyond himself, our current globe-trotting oligarchs have discovered in global climate change a way to love the planet which does not oblige them to love or stay in any place in particular. Thus, just this week, we discovered you can pave a path through a particular rainforest in order to have a meeting about saving rainforests in general. Madeline Austin offered us a paper on the kind of love, storge, which will motivate people to care for creation in the particular place that they are. My mother and sister loved this paper, especially the expanded version, which mentions Wendell Berry, who my mom had the honor to meet, and who both my mother and my sister love. And my father would have loved this paper as well. So we award this year's William G. Batchelder III Memorial Award for the study of place, a prize put toward paying for conference registration and the conference center stay, to quote, "An everyman environmentalism, love of place is a virtue," by Madeline Austin. So congratulations. And now, throneless, but only for now, the lovely and talented James Patterson.
I was watching who was clapping.
Like Stalin.
The audio and photographs will be edited. Mr. Annandale. So before we announce the winner of, do you want me to do the thing, the spot with the money guys? Anyway, before we talk about the Lawler Prize, I wanted to recognize the Tulia sponsor, Regent University Honors College. Atticus sponsors Center for Religion, Culture, and Democracy in the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. Russell Kirk, the forum sponsors Russell Kirk Center for Cultural Renew and the Thales Academy College, and etc. All right, so for those of you who are unaware, we began a prize named after Peter Augustine Lawler last year. Its inaugural winner was Trey Dimsdale. And we put together this description. That Lawler was a great teacher, mentor, scholar, and Christian. His legacy is not only in his many publications, but in his lively fellowship with his colleagues and ordinary people interested in the way faith sends us wondering and wandering. Weeks before his death, Dr. Lawler spoke at the 2017 Ciceronian Society annual meeting in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the LSU conference. Where I got pulled over for speeding. That was great. But he also met with countless attendees, socializing into the wee hours of the morning. He possessed a keen mind and a commitment to building institutions dedicated to the study of things divine. Dr. Lawler also possessed the character of a true Christian, generous and faithful in everything. We wish to honor him and others like him with an award in his name. And this year, the Ciceronian Society Board of Directors has chosen to give the prize to Jeff O. Nelson. Jeff is the director of the Russell Kirk Center for Cultural Renew, which he co-founded with Annette Kirk. But for his full bio will require another panel. I haven't read this yet, so this is very good. Whoever wrote this is very good. Anyway, prior to his return to the Kirk Center, Jeff had held a senior leadership or board of trustee roles at the Intercollegiate Studies Institute for 3 decades, most recently overseeing ISI's national education program as its chief academic officer. A Michigan native, Jeff grew up west of Detroit, and spent much of his youth in Russell Kirk's native town of Plymouth. He holds a BA from the University of Detroit, an MAR from Yale University Divinity School, and he earned his PhD in American History from the University of Edinburgh, Scotland. His dissertation was on Edinburgh and America. He's the founding editor and publisher of ISI Books, an imprint that has published some of the most consequential conservative titles of the last 25 years. He was also editor of the Intercollegiate Review, a journal of scholarship and opinion, and was privileged to work with the distinguished Georgetown University political theorist George W. Carey as executive editor of the Political Science Reviewer. From 1995 to 2005, he was editor of the center's flagship publication, University Bookman, and currently serves as its publisher and editor at large. During his undergraduate years in Detroit, Jeff attended Piety Hill seminars in Mecosta, Michigan, became one of Russell Kirk's literary assistants, and eventually became his son-in-law. Marrying Cecilia Kirk, Dr. Kirk's second daughter, who is with us this evening. I hope that's still true. Oh, there she is. They live in Grand Rapids and have 3 children, one of whom attends Ave Maria University, current place where I hang my hat. That barely scratches the surface of what Jeff has done, but I want to conclude with some remarks with some of Jeff's friends and people he's had impact on. Richard Reich writes, Jeff Nelson has demonstrated throughout his career the virtues of sharing insights and learning with those who need him. He is kind, gentle, and caring. With Jeff, you know that he tells you the truth. In short, he does the things that Peter Lawler always did. You might come for the genuine need to learn about a subject or question in your mind, but you're made better by his attention to you as a person and the conversation that occurs. He is a worthy recipient of the award. Dr. Joseph Stewart said, as a young student at the Russell Kirk Center in 2006, I was trying to figure out how to do a doctoral project on Christopher Dawson. Jeff Nelson introduced me to his doctoral advisor in Scotland, Owen Dudley Edwards. Owen agreed to take me on, and Jeff introduced me to other friends of his in Edinburgh that made my experience there incredibly rewarding. I was suddenly part of a network of friendships, and this made all the difference. In the years since then, Jeff's mentorship has been a source of wisdom and guidance in my life and thought. I look up to him to this day, and I am so grateful for how Jeff's generosity has changed my life. Bradley C.S. Watson says, where's the alcohol? I need, oh no, that's that's different. I knew Jeff Nelson as I knew Peter Lawler through our connections to ISI. For many years, Jeff ran the academic side of the place and worked tirelessly to keep it true to its mission of educating for liberty. And he did so as a Christian gentleman who loved his students. And this, he was like Peter. Despite his impressive academic credentials and august titles, this is very Watson. Jeff always exuded humility and caritas, not to mention consistent good cheer, whether designing and planning sophisticated academic programs or mentoring by precept and example the lucky students who were part of them, or with a smile on his face running errands for those students to locate missing supplies. Jeff has always been the complete package. Whenever I think of him, I think not only of ideas and events, but of laughter. In the decades I have known him, he has acted justly, loved mercy, and walked humbly with God. I treasure his friendship and cannot think of a more fitting recipient of the Peter Augustine Lawler Award. Finally, one person who wanted to remain anonymous says, much can be said about Jeff's accomplishments that qualify him for the award. Jeffrey Nelson predicted Russell Kirk in the mid-1990s, speaking of his new son-in-law, might carry on my literary raids against the enemies of the permanent things. It's good. Given Jeff's accomplishments as an editor and as a leader in higher education and educational nonprofits, Dr. Kirk's prediction was truer than he likely anticipated. But what really qualifies Jeff for this award, even more so than his professional and literary accomplishments, is the spirit of generosity that animates his life. Jeff has been the talent for making people of all levels feel welcomed and at ease, both around himself and in the places and institutions he is devoted to building. Jeff genuinely delights in building up of others and helping them to use their talents for the betterment of civilization. And he does so with humility, without a desire for attention or praise. I would like to add a few words of my own, just 4,000 or 5,000. Strap in. I am the president. I would like to add a few words for awarding Jeff the Lawler Prize. During the past decade of political change, many conservative leaders have proved to be followers. They have followed ideological trends, unscrupulous donors, and their own ambitions for fame and fortune. Jeff has refused to do the same. Rather, he has shown us at the Ciceronian Society how to take the harder path. He has remained a leader by sticking to his core commitments, regardless of whether he gets to appear on television, shake hands with powerful people, or build up a big bank account. I'm reminded of Chairman Batchelder's remark about one large think tank that took a grant from the Korean arms dealer and produced a paper named Social Capital, Civil Society, and the Role of Landmines. That's not quite how the story goes, but I was under limited time. Jeff's advice to all of us at the Ciceronian Society was something we took to heart. Do not change who we are and what we do in the pursuit of financial support. That said, you should donate generously to the Ciceronian Society, and then if any money is left over, toss a few coins to the Russell Kirk Center. I mean, they got a house already. I mean, library, look at us. Anyway, Jeff gave us the hard truth. We had to follow principles, not trends. We must commit ourselves to intellectual discipleship among Protestant, Catholic, and Orthodox scholars interested in the study of tradition, place, and things divine. Those who want to do the same will find us and help us in that mission. And we will have remained faithful to our cause to serve all of you here. We may not end up with prime real estate in Washington, D.C., or make acquaintances with presidents and prime ministers, but we will experience true lifelong friendships and maybe learn a thing or two about Philip Reef, St. Augustine, Samuel Johnson, and maybe even old Cicero along the way. Jeff Nelson, for your role in shaping the consciences of the Ciceronian Society and setting the best example we could have for leading an intellectually and spiritually grounded organization, it is our great joy and humble honor to award you the 2025 Peter Augustine Lawler Prize in the Study of Things Divine.
It's just a box.
It's like the size of a tear, which I almost have on my mouth and my eyes right now. Talk about a surprise. Oh my goodness. Josh, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
And thank you to Cecilia for making sure he got here.
What do you say? Talk about surprise. That I think that's other than maybe being surprised 31 years ago that Cecilia actually said yes to my question. This is probably this is a big surprise. The first thing I got to do is really edit that too long bio down. Oh my God, listen to that. I'm gonna hit WordPress tonight and chop that thing down, so you don't get the benefit of it. But thank you. I knew Peter Lawler very well. Published 4 of his books. I can't really imagine, other than maybe Russell Kirk himself, anyone I would be more privileged to have an award named after. I don't know if this means that I'm just getting up there in life or not, but anyway, I'm deeply grateful to all of you. I mean, being part of this kind of family of friends and all the authors I've worked with, and students we've mentored. It's been a great privilege in my life to sort of to mediate in the ways that I can this great tradition of Christian humanism and traditional conservatism, Burkean conservatism to that next generation. And I'm just really honored here and feel inspired to do my work going forward. And thank you all very, very much.
We still have hospitality tonight, but I want to. Coral just texted me an idea. We're gonna try it. This might be dangerous. We're gonna try it. I've always wanted to end the Ciceronian Society with song. Sober. And there are some songs I've thought of before, but then Coral had the great idea that probably the one song you all know is the doxology, and I think that's a fitting end. So please rise as we close out. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise Him, all creatures here below. Praise Him above, ye heavenly hosts. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. hospitality starts at 8. Same place as usual.
You've been listening to The Sower, a production of the Ciceronian Society. If you've enjoyed this conversation, we hope you'll consider signing up for our newsletter and joining us for a future event, and we're especially excited for our 2026 conference at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska, March 12th through the 14th. Be sure to rate and review this podcast, share it with your friends, and check out our website at ciceroniansociety.org. Now may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Thank you for listening.